So this is how I always approach my doodles. Sometimes I will start with a piece of paper, usually a loose piece of paper, typically cut to a square of whatever size. Sometimes I'll also do circles or triangles. I often work with white paper, but sometimes I'll work with colored paper or some paper that I've painted. But if you don't have plain white paper for some reason, some stuff that I've found work pretty well is black paper, gray paper, some of that like colored construction paper that you might have had as a kid. I've also used notebook paper, which isn't necessarily ideal because of the lines, but like you can incorporate them or like make it so they're not as noticeable. And then I usually use scissors or a paper trimmer to cut down this stuff. But this has wonky edges, so I think I used scissors for this one. What I have here is some watercolor paper. I've also had, if you are not going to use any watercolors, regular printer paper will work. You'll just have like some different qualities of like your ink from the pen that you're using than you would if you were using like a nicer paper. I've also had luck with like that tannish sketchbook paper stuff, but really you can use whatever paper you want. And then once I have my paper chosen, I will typically start with a pencil line, like using my pencil to divide it into sections. So this can be a scribble, or it can be like a shape, like right now I'm drawing a star shape just because that's what I feel like. And if you're in the Zentangle world, this is what they call a string. I don't like to call what I do Zentangles for like several reasons that I'm not going to get into in this video. I've gone back and forth on how much I want to talk about that, but yeah, but I used to call what I did Zentangle, but then I decided that didn't really fit me. And then if you wanted to, you could also start with like, I'll flip this to the other side. Oh, I have something written there. You can always also start with like a frame by making dots in the corners and then connecting those lines together. Again, that's another thing that's common in Zentangle, but what I'm showing you is not Zentangle. So I'd always start with that. And then this is the fun part. You just start using patterns and stuff. And there are a couple different ways you can approach this. You can either just like stick to filling in the sections and staying within the boundaries like I'm doing here. Oh, well, I went over the line a little bit, but that's fine. So like there, I am staying within the boundaries and trying my best to keep within the space that I designated. Or you can also use the lines themselves as like a general guide. So like for instance, if I draw a line here along that line and then draw like some heart shapes or something, that I'm not paying attention to the shapes too much. Like I am a little bit, but I'm using it as like a general guide instead of like something confining me. And then I recommend you can also kind of blend those two concepts together where you're doing a mix of like staying within the boundaries but also kind of playing with the boundaries. So like here, where these lines are, say I was gonna do like a pattern stripe or something like that, I can start from these points on here to just kind of give me an idea of where to go, and then it's kind of blending the two patterns into there. And then I can start making my pattern that I wanted to do in this section. And like on and on, whatever. So that's one thing. Another thing I also recommend is having a few different sizes of pens. So I always like to have a small, a medium, and a large. Typically, I will have a 005 as my small. It's not focusing, but that's my small. My medium is typically a 1.0, or no, not a 1.0, that's huge. A 0.3, sorry. Sometimes I get a little confused because one is smaller than 3. But anyway, but 0.3 is typically my medium. And then a 1.0 is typically my large. And my favorite brand is Staedtler, but you can also use Sakura, Prismacolor makes some. If you don't have either of those, you could also just use a Sharpie. The only problems with Sharpies is that depending on your paper, if it's a thinner paper, Sharpies will bleed through. And also, Sharpies don't have as much of a variety of sizes, at least that I've been able to find. It's pretty much like super huge, and then like a medium, and then an ultra fine. Which for me, that's not ideal just because the super huge one is way too huge for me. It's like a big chisel tip or something. I don't have one here to show you because I don't use it. But yeah, but I mean, if you don't mind working larger, that size of Sharpie would probably be fine. But if you like to work smaller like me and you only have access to Sharpies, or something along those lines, I would recommend just doing their two smallest sizes. But because the reason I have 3 different sizes is to assist me with filling and with coloring in spaces. So you really could actually probably just get by with one size pretty easily. In fact, when I was doodling a lot, all I used was a 0.1 micron pen. And that did fine for me. It was a little tedious coloring in some larger open spaces, but possible. But yeah, but like, say if I wanted to like fill in this space here, like with a 005, that is a bit tedious to fill in if I wanted a solid color. Like, it's possible. It may be if you want a scribbly quality, that's perfect. That's great. But a 0.3 is great for like spaces this size, like a sort of medium space. A 0.05 is great for little teeny tiny spaces to fill them like that. Because if I used a bigger pen, like say 0.3 here, like it's possible, but it's not as easy to stay inside that little tiny shape. Then a 1.0, which is the biggest one I have. See, this is very different from a 0.1. This is probably about 10 times the size, I think. I could be wrong because I don't know the exact sizes of all the nibs and stuff, but this is good for filling in like really big areas. So like I might do something, well I might do like this size, so I might actually use the 0.3 for this size typically. Or if I wanted to color in a space like this spot here, that is where I would probably use a Sharpie. Except around here, I'd probably like outline this spot here. And then I'd probably, well, actually, after outlining that, this seems like a much more manageable space. So you can also, now that I think about it, you can also always divide a larger space into sections to make it easier to color in the full area, like I'm doing here. Which I'm not typically filling in large areas like this. So I don't do this too much. Yeah, and then small pens. I use a 005 a lot because I like to work a lot with really close lines. And I just find that's a lot easier to do that the smaller the pen you have. Because if I did that same effect with a 03, right, this is a 03, then the line is thicker, which is sometimes what I want. But a lot of times I really like the effect of really close, really thin lines. So, again, it's a matter of preference. And if you only have one pen, that's perfectly fine, as long as it's a good size for you to work with. I've also done some drawings with just a Sharpie or just a marker, and have had fun with that. So it's not the end of the world if you can't get a range of nice pens or anything. Yeah, and then there's like all kinds of different things you can do from here. Like sometimes I might go along the pencil drawing that I made, and I'm using a 03 right now, and just draw some circles along it. And then if there's any gaps between the circles, I'll just draw a line, kind of like if it's a thread full of beads or something. Sometimes I'll also round the space in between the two circles like that. Which all I'm doing there is, let me see if I can get this closer. So all I'm doing there is I'm just kind of starting a little bit ahead of the spot that I want to darken, making a curved line and connecting it to the next shape. So I'll do it one more time so you can see. So I hope that was close enough. And then I also like to have a sort of library of different patterns and stuff. Some I create myself, some I collect from other sources. Like I like tanglepatterns.com. Again, that is a Zentangle-centric site. But there's a lot of great patterns on there that are fun to do. And I like to manipulate and play with patterns quite a bit. So like this heart pattern here, maybe I want to play with that heart shape a little bit. Maybe I want to make it look a little taller, or maybe I want this, actually, maybe I want this whole thing to be like a really long heart along that line instead of doing like several different hearts and stuff. So, yeah, even if you don't be afraid to like play around with different patterns and stuff. Even if you're the type of person that can't come up with patterns on your own or have trouble doing it. Also, along those same lines, if you have trouble thinking of what to draw or whatever, I recommend having like a list of patterns that you like drawn in your sketchbook or something, and then number them like 1 through 6, use a dice and, or use a die and roll it, and then choose a pattern that way. I randomly choose patterns all the time. But I would say, if you are randomly generating patterns, don't feel like you have to constrain yourself to whatever comes up. If something comes up that's like triangles or something like that, and you think to yourself, oh, I actually feel more like drawing circles. Or you think, oh, I don't think triangles would look good on here. Like, you don't have to draw triangles. I know that probably goes without saying, but sometimes people need to hear it. And I also like to add color to this type of thing sometimes. So I'll typically use markers very often to color spots. And I don't usually pay attention to if it's waterproof or not, because usually I'm not doing anything on top of the area I'm coloring, other than maybe some shading if I feel like it, though I very rarely do any shading. I'm gonna finish coloring this because it's bothering me now that it's not all the way colored. But I've also used crayons, like Crayola crayons, to color stuff. Watercolors are fun to use, especially when you're using watercolor paper. If you're using something like printer paper, you can use watercolors. I've done that before, but it is different. Because the type of paper is not exactly made for watercolors. But I know when I first started doing art, in fact, actually for a very long time, I didn't really believe that watercolor paper was made any difference. But it does. Just because, like, the watercolor paper takes and holds the watercolor differently than printer paper, which actually is more apparent when you're doing something like a wet and wet technique. At least it's more apparent to me when that happens. Because I remember when I only had access to printer paper, I would try wet and wet techniques like this, and then be like, it's not spreading very well. In fact, I have some... No, that's watercolor paper. I thought that was printer paper. I have some printer paper somewhere. Oh, here we are. So I can show you. So, I'll do a wet and wet technique again on here. I'll zoom in a bit again, just so you can see it a little better. So I'm painting with some water, and then I'll grab some paint, and then it spreads and all that fun stuff, and the water is sitting on top of the paper, but slowly getting soaked in as it dries. Now for printer paper, if I do the same thing, I'll put down the water and it's immediately soaking in because of the type of paper that's being used. And you'll get like a cool effect, a little bit. Like, I mean, it's spreading a little bit, but it's not spreading as much as on that watercolor paper. So, if you don't know the difference, there you go. Because I didn't for a very long time. I was like, why does everyone spend so much on watercolor paper? And now I know. And personally, I won't go back. But, you know, sometimes you might like the effect on printer paper more, which, if that's the case for you, awesome. You don't have to spend as much on paper as I do. Yeah, that's pretty much how I doodle and stuff. Other ways of adding color, I will sometimes make like a colored background, like a watercolor background, or recently I've been using like a mix of like watercolors and distress inks and watercolor crayons and spray inks to make some backgrounds and stuff. And sometimes I'll use markers to color the background, and stuff like that, but at this point I think I'm just rambling. nonsense a bit. So I'll leave it there. But that's essentially how I go about doodling. But yeah, make sure to like and subscribe if you enjoy these kinds of videos where I am attempting to talk about what I'm doing or teach a art thing, but am ultimately very rambly. And I'll see you next time.